Wendy is with us in studio today for an update on the timeshare industry, and we might have space for some open line calls at the end of the hour, although I suspect we're probably going to be hearing from a good number of listeners who have been impacted by the in perpetuity contracts we're going to be talking about today. I have never had the slightest interest in signing up for a timeshare or even going to one of the presentations, Wendy, no matter how many lovely prizes have been dangled at me as bait, because for the simple reason, I know a couple of people who did sign up for these contracts, and with one or two exceptions, all I ever hear about them is complaints about the fact that they can never get a booking at the place they wanted to go to at the time they want it. And the one plus is a couple of them have had some lovely adventures discovering new places because they had to settle for the second choice. But for the most part, my gut has been, well, if I joined a holiday club because a particular resort in their sort of bouquet appealed to me, I'd want to be able to go to that resort at least once in my lifetime, not be fobbed off on its secondary property, if I can put it that way. So that's part of the problem. But more importantly, I'm aware that some of these contracts have been among the most notoriously devious and difficult to get out of, haven't they?
Yes. So I've been doing consumer journalism for 26 years now, and for the bulk of those I've been talking about various timeshare issues, obviously many of them predating the Consumer Protection Act, which came into force 13 years ago now already. So I've had all the complaints. I don't hear from people when they've had a lovely time, and clearly the industry is not all bad, especially it's when it's the wrong club and people spend the minimum, and that's the hardest. I mean, my own parents did a 10-year timeshare deal. They paid quite a lot of money. It was about 80,000, I think. And boy, did they work it. And my mother's very good at admin, and she's very determined. I wonder where
To get it value. Where
yes,
did she get it from?
I wonder where did I get it from? And she really, had her dates sorted. She made the calls. She got her bookings. They went overseas twice. We had a family reunion in Canada, and she managed to get, accommodation there for a song. And so she really, and it was 10 years, and when that 10 years was up, doing that kind of travel was also up, and it served them beautifully. Okay, so it's not all bad, but there is a lot that's bad, and the main thing is these never-ending contracts, Pippa, which if before the Consumer Protection Act were, I would say, morally questionable, to put it mildly, and the act sort of put an end to consumers being locked into something like that forever. And so the bulk of complaints coming through now are from people who are elderly and who cannot afford these levies anymore, who do not and cannot go traveling anymore. Many are widowed, and they want to get out. Some of them having not been able to get much benefit, if any, over all the years they've paid. They'd had to add up all the money on the initial spend, I'm not going to say investment, and levies. I mean, they could have had themselves some wonderful holidays in the destinations and venues of their choice. So for them, a great many people, it was really a really bad idea. That day that they were lured to a timeshare presentation, mostly those days on the strength of the lure of you've won a prize, and then they had to ask for the prize, and it was usually something silly. I actually have to just quickly. I once went to a timeshare presentation as a consumer journalist. My children were in preschool, and their preschool had changed the holiday date, so I knew that. We could, because you can never go on school holidays. Those free prizes were never for holidays, right? So I knew that we could actually take it. Yes. So I went and I had first-hand experience of all the, the tactics, etc. What they were promising. And then the four of us went for a lovely holiday at the Wild Coast, one of the Wild Coast venues, or just before the Wild Coast, sorry, for, very little, and it was lovely. But I played the system, right? But for most people, it's
not possible to.
No, it's not possible to.
Okay, so just to recap, some of the most extreme problematic behaviours, it's the issue of not being able to make reservations at peak times,
right?
Despite the promises that were made. You flagged the fact that when somebody wants to cancel these contracts because they've got too old to travel, or perhaps they've fallen ill, or have emigrated.
Money issues.
Or they need the cash, they can't get out of them. In some of the most egregious cases, Wendy, the clubs claim that these in perpetuity contracts don't even stop on the signatory's death, that they
No.
roll over to their descendants.
They want to lock in their children, can you imagine? And for people who put it in their wills, believing what they were told, that this was a fantastic investment, then cursed their children with now liability, because the clubs are definitely saying you are now liable, here you are, and
You've
he has
inherited
your
the
levies,
timeshare.
you've inherited,
Yeah.
and you are now legally responsible to carry on paying. I mean, it's what the Act calls unconscionable. I love that
Absolutely,
word,
yeah.
because it's really does cover what is
A manner of
happening
all ills.
here. Yeah.
And just one more common error to flag here before we bring in some expert comment. They're notoriously poor at respecting the concept of the cooling off period. Wendy, and again, if you've signed on before the advent of the CPA, that's different. But the CPA allows anybody who has been sold something via one of these direct marketing
Direct
practices.
marketing, high pressure, very high
Yeah.
pressure. In this case, it's face to face.
You're supposed to have a 5 business day cooling off
Essentially
period.
a week's cooling off period
So you
at
can
least.
change your mind and say,
Yes.
actually, I've thought
Yeah.
about it and I don't want it. Some people have been waiting for up to 2 years to get their refunds in these cases.
And actually, we can check with Trudy, but I recall, because as I say, I was handling these complaints long before the CPA came into effect 13 years ago. There was some regulation, and it's amazing how quickly you forget, but there was a cooling off period as well, which applied. I think it was a self-regulatory thing that the Timeshare Industry Association or something, but there was definitely a cooling off period even then. So one of our case studies was a sign up in 2008. So they would definitely have, she should have, because she went in the next day, as we'll hear, to say, I've changed my mind, and they said,
wouldn't
no,
hear
you can't.
it.
No.
Okay. Well, we've already got our first voice note through from somebody who has exact experience of what we've just been discussing. Wendy, let's take a listen.
Hi, Pippa. My parents have timeshare, and it's really was a good program when they were 60 or 70, but now my dad is in his 80s, and they're not traveling as much, but now they cannot make use of the points, and they need to sell their package, and nobody wants to buy timeshare, so they have to be stuck with a levy, which they don't make use of. And I would like to know if it's possible to nominate the directors of these timeshares as the beneficiaries once they pass on. So can we allocate those directors as the lifelong beneficiaries for the timeshares? So when they pass, the title deeds will be transferred to the directors of the timeshare. At least that way the ownership will move. Cheers.
That's brilliant, Justin. You'd see a very rapid change if that was to happen.
So the problem is people are getting older. They want to hang on to them, bleed them dry, essentially, because they aren't getting enough new younger
income.
people coming in, and the whole system will collapse.
Wendy, just before we bring in Trudy and today's first case study, I mean, you can see you've been talking about these issues for years. The implementation of the Consumer Protection Act was meant to stamp out this kind of behavior.
Yes.
Has any oversight body at any point stepped in to try and enforce the change, or even just get a sense of the nature of the problematic behavior?
Right. So the answer is yes-ish. The National Consumer Commission commissioned a nationwide study in 2018. Timeshare members were invited to attend roadshows in cities and towns around the country where and I witnessed this in Durban, they were invited to stand up, and stand up they did and tell their stories, many of them elderly, as we've been saying. Just heart-wrenching. I wrote about many of them at the time. And the upshot of all of that, and they spent a lot of money on doing, they outsourced, this to a company to carry out this nationwide exercise. The resulting report, which was so eagerly awaited by us in the media and obviously the people who were locked into these contracts, the resulting report made several dozen recommendations to end the abusive practices of the South African timeshare industry, but none of them have been implemented by the Minister of Trade and Industry. Those forever contracts were not banned outright as we'd hoped. I mean, why not just say from here on, anyone can give a 30-day notice period to cancel? the Ombudsman for Consumer Goods and Services was tasked with helping the most desperate timeshare clients escape their contracts, mostly, as you've been saying, elderly folk who couldn't travel anymore and were being squeezed by annual levies, and having to forgo other necessities so that they can pay at the risk of all sorts of dire things happening to them. But the outright ban didn't happen, and the clubs are now saying, yes, you can cancel, but you must pay us 8,000 rand cancellation penalty, or 12,000, or whatever. And so that's not really what was required in these cases. I don't understand
why nobody's enforced it.
No.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Okay, well, one person who's been trying to enforce some degree of accountability, something of a one-woman crusade against the worst offenders, and it's a name and a voice very familiar to Cape Talk listeners, that of consumer attorney Trudy Brookman. Trudy has actually taken on a number of these cases with some considerable success, we should add. So we've invited her to join us again today to reflect on what options are available for somebody who is really locked into a timeshare contract that they really want out of. Trudy, it's always great to have you with us. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Hi, Pippa and Wendy and all the listeners. Can I jump in by just correcting a thing?
Yeah,
I
yes.
think I have additional information, more so than you ladies have. You were saying a moment ago that the 2018 timeshare report that was commissioned by the National Consumer Commission hasn't been implemented at all. If you'd asked me until a few months ago, I would be wholeheartedly
Okay, I won't feel be too
passionately
ashamed.
agreeing with
Okay. What's changed?
There's been a little bit of mysterious movement. We came across in the office, actually by fluke, we came across a sort of a report or a report back on the parliamentary website of a parliamentary portfolio committee where the report and the lack of implementation was actually discussed, and they say that there has been a little bit of implementation. Okay. I think there's admission that most of it hasn't been implemented. But there has been some government assistance for cancellation of contracts at the National Consumer Commission and at the Consumer Goods and Services Ombud. There's been engagement with VOASA, which is the industry body for timeshare, and there is a plan to draft regulations to the Property Timesharing Control Act, which is the overarching act, a very thin and old school act, unfortunately, that governs timeshare and various other types of fractional and other property ownership schemes. So, and the idea is that these regulations will really fill in the gaps. Unfortunately, so it's wonderful news, but houses for a proviso. Unfortunately, the government can't figure out under which department the act falls, and consequently which department should deal with the drafting of the regulations. And as far as I know, that's been standing still for about a year. Okay. So as soon as they figure out which department, hopefully in the future we'll have regulations that fill in these gaps.
Oh, I'm definitely speaking to you off air to take
that one further.
Up. Yes.
Trudy, thanks for the update, and may it be sooner rather than later, is all I can say. Before we talk about strategies for getting out of these contracts, can you just give us a sense of scale here? How big is this industry? How many different timeshare clubs are we talking about that are marketing to South Africans?
The last time I saw a stat in terms of how many South Africans own timeshare, it was 750,000. I think that was a calculation or a guesstimate. That's a long time ago, and I'm sure it must be over 1 million now. There are 968 timeshare contracts that we've already signed, cancelled at our firm. And to give an idea about the size of the industry, there are 99 timeshare clubs in South Africa. They have a total of 5,393 vacation units, in other words, holiday flats or rooms, and it translates to 280,000 timeshare weeks that are available.
But not
when
everybody.
you do the math and try and work out whether you think there are sufficient units and timeshare weeks available for the number of members in the group. But everyone who lands on my desk complains bitterly that they can't get bookings. So it feels as though there's an undersupply compared to the number of members.
Absolutely, because if there's 750,000 minimum owners and only 280,000 available weeks, that's quite blatant maths, is telling you've got a 3 times oversubscription problem right there.
Yeah.
To be fair, again, as Wendy said at the beginning, Trudy, not all of the players are bad eggs in this basket. Some of them do respect the tenets of the CPA and act in good faith. But how big is the bad slice of the pie, if I can put it that way? Are there any particular players that you need to approach with caution, or are there still an unacceptably large percentage of players who really play fast and furious here?
I would say so. It's not an industry which is crowned with glory, to be honest, if I can give a legal opinion on that. The clubs that do play fair, at least in our correspondence with them, are Easy Holiday Club, Fun Seekers, Dream Vacation Club, and Flexi Club. They are now, if we send a cancellation letter, they have now backed down and they allow the cancellations to be done, and they implement those. The biggest players, unfortunately, are Quality Vacation Club, African Club Innovation, Leisure Portfolio Association, and then the Holiday Club, and they are all point systems. The previous ones that I mentioned are also point systems. We find that the point systems are really where things go squiff, where you have a week at a particular resort and you're contracted with that resort and you always have your week and you know where you go. That seems to work much better, unless you hit ill health or old age or emigrate or something like that and need to dispose of it. But at least there's less unscrupulous behavior there. It's with the point systems where people say, I can just never get a booking.
Yeah. Okay. Judy, just before we break for news, I'm going to ask you the very important question of what it is that you are doing to have helped those 968 timeshare contractors get out of their contracts. And then when we come back after the news, we'll hear a case study and talk to Trudy some more about strategies for dealing with this. Very briefly, how are you doing it? What are you saying to these clubs that is convincing them to back down?
So we write a 7-page letter. It's a fairly standard letter by now. You can't reinvent the wheel each time. But essentially, we write to the club and explain to them that their contract is either void or that we have a right to cancel it based on their breach, their misrepresentation, and their non-compliance with the Consumer Protection Act, where it's a credit agreement, the National Credit Act, and then the Timeshare Property Control Act. So it's a 7-page legal letter to explain your contract is invalid, you have misrepresented to our client, sorry, that's another ground, and your contract doesn't comply with the necessary legal requirements in the following respects. Consequently, the contract is void, or we are entitled to cancel it, and we now cancel it, and then no cancellation penalty arises, and the consumer should be free to stop paying, and that should be the end of the story.
Quite a mixed bag of interesting experiences, Wendy. Maretta saying, I had timeshare, and when I wanted to get rid of it, it literally took me 2 years. I was prepared to give it away for free, but I still needed a lawyer to get that done. So please, people, think twice before ever considering timeshare. Doreen writes, we were able to cancel our holiday club contract in 2022. We were forced to pay our 2023 levies and take those points. We then booked our last holiday with most of those points in February 23, and now we are free. Alvin says, when we decided to get out of our timeshare, we just stopped paying. They tried over and over to pressure us. We merely wrote back and told them to take us to court. This went on for about a year, and they eventually gave up. They tried the exit payment request, but we just ignored them. So there's three quite different case studies so far.
It's interesting because a lot of old people who've, paid their dues their whole lives, never had a problem with non-payment and blacklistings and all the rest, are just it's just not their style. And they're so terrified of the
what might
repercussions.
happen.
But we should speak to Trudy about, I told them to take us to court because she had an interesting response when we were chatting off air.
Okay, we'll get there in a minute. Just one more for now. Marina's saying a friend just phoned the timeshare and said he's retired. He can't afford the levies anymore. They said send an email to that effect and they'd cancel the contract. No money exchanged, but they
Wonderful.
were out of the contract, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
So again,
Mixed bag.
it's a mixed bag. Not all players in the industry are playing fast and loose with consumer rights, but some are. So let's bring in this week's case study at this point, and then we'll circle back to Trudy Brookman again. Cynthia in Hermanus is one of those who's had a really uphill battle trying to cancel a timeshare contract. Now, in her case, she signed an in perpetuity agreement with African Club Innovations in January 2008. So that was well before the introduction of the Consumer Protection Act. And Cynthia is with us on the line. Cynthia, thank you so much for being willing to chat to us. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
How did you come to sign up with ACI? What marketing strategy was used? What convinced you that this was a good idea? And what was your expectation of what you would receive?
Well, first of all, I was a widow at the time, and this prospect of getting a free holiday when I went to the talk was an opportunity to take my children on a holiday. And then, of course, the rest is history.
I understand, Cynthia, that you actually tried literally the day after the presentation to cancel the contract. Is that correct?
Yes. I went back the next day to cancel, but I was just told I couldn't. I tried to cancel again in 2011, and I was just told, you're in this for life, and your children will inherit.
Gosh, so you even told it would roll over to your children. So you were stuck like that for all of these years, Cynthia, and you've been paying your levies all of these years. Have you at least been able to enjoy some holidays in the intervening years?
I was successful in getting one holiday to venue that I wanted to attend, but all of the others, when attempting to get where I required, I was unsuccessful.
Okay, so the usual story that there was no availability at the venue you wanted at the time that suited you. Wendy, would you like to just explain to us what's happened that you've come to take on Cynthia's case at this point?
Sure. This was a few months ago that I first heard of Cynthia's case. She's now a pensioner with no income. She was diagnosed with ovarian cancer in April, and she's just finished on top of everything, 6 months of chemo. So needless to say, she hasn't been able to travel. She's in a financially strained situation and definitely unable to afford the timeshare management fee. When she was insisting on exiting, they were told that she would have to pay over 8,000 Rand to do so. So I got hold of Trudy and said, please, can you take on this case pro bono, as she very often does for us. Sadly, ACI is one of the clubs that have dug in their heels, and they will not accept any other solution, any exit strategy other than you pay us that 8,000 Rand. And so this saga is most definitely still carrying on for Cynthia.
Now, Trudy, let me bring you back in at this point. Thank you very much for agreeing to take on this case pro bono. You just before the break, you told us about the strategy and that 7-page letter you use in cases like this. I gather it hasn't worked in this particular case. Tell us what you've tried.
Well, there's work and work.
Okay.
Cancellation in a situation where either the contract is invalid or where the consumer has the right to cancel because there's been breach of contract or non-compliance with legal requirements in respect of the it's a unilateral action in law. So if I have the right to cancel and I then cancel, it doesn't really matter whether the party that I'm cancelling with agrees with me, accepts the cancellation, implements the cancellation, whether they try and take money out of my account again by way of debit order or any other method. That's not legally relevant. The cancellation is valid if I have a valid reason and a valid right to do so. So the cancellation letter that we sent off for Cynthia on the 17th of October has had the effect of cancelling the contract. African Club Innovations have not responded appropriately to that. They're still sending her invoices. Her monthly fee is 1,400 Rand or something like that. And so she still gets the statements. And what they're inclined to do is to get Luri debt collectors to call you as well. What we have, we know the process by now, because the entire group of Quality Vacation Club, African Club Innovation, LPA, etc., all fall under Vacation Recreational Services, and they always send a standard letter they don't send it back to us, they send it direct to the consumer, which is really awful move. And they keep on invoicing you and trying to take the debit order. So we know by now hand we need to warn the clients beforehand.
And they also undermine,
just ignore.
They undermine your opinion and say they've had their own opinion and they don't accept your arguments. And so here's your bill and please pay.
Yes.
But what about legal action? Should Cynthia? I mean, do you know of cases like these that landed up in court?
We have cancelled about 500 timeshare contracts with the QEC group, African Club Innovations included, and not for one of those clients have they ever been blacklisted or sued. So we can almost give a guarantee that you will not be blacklisted and not be sued. You can't be blacklisted in respect of a disputed amount in any event. So obviously it's disputed if the contract is cancelled. In fact, it's just not due. And then in terms of suing, I'm pretty certain that these timeshare contracts, timeshare clubs are too scared to sue anyone who stops paying them. Because if they go to court and they lose in court, that creates a legal precedent, and it applies to all of the other members. So they will never do that. And the callers who called to say, just stop paying, that is excellent advice. I wouldn't ordinarily just advise you have a dispute with a supplier, now you just stop paying. That can be breach of contract, so apply this broader than timeshare. But with timeshare, you can just stop paying. In fact, you won't be taken seriously by the timeshare club unless you stop paying. And that really is necessary to pave the way for you to be able to cancel. Then we assist our clients to reverse debit orders. If you've reversed a debit order that's unauthorized by you 3 months in a row, then the debit order can't be put through again, and then you are free of these people for the rest of your life. You can block the debt collectors
and your children.
And just ignore them. And your children.
So I just want to bring Cynthia back in at this point. Cynthia, where are you in that process? Have you been able to stop the debit orders going off?
Yes. We were successful in stopping the debit orders. However, they are still harassing me with debt collectors, and they even billed me this month for the next year's fees.
Oh. So you just have to really be thick-skinned about it and stand your ground. You know that Trudy has at least helped to stop the money going off. You know you have cancelled this contract and you have ticked all the legal boxes you needed to do that. It must, though, be difficult with everything else that you've been going through. And I'm so sorry for the health challenges on top of all of this. It must be wearing you down, I would imagine, to have every month have that harassment happening.
Yes. No, they just got no empathy whatsoever.
Yeah. Cynthia, I'm so sorry that you've had that experience, and I'm so thankful that Trudy got involved and has been able to at least stop the money going out of your account.
And get technically the contract is now cancelled, whether they accept it or not. And Cynthia's just going to have to find a way to deal with the harassment until they give up. But the thing is not to continue to pay.
Absolutely. Cynthia, thank you, and all the best to you. Wendy, you have another case study which illustrates a different issue within this
Yes.
timeshare contract issue, which I'd also love to hear Trudy's input on. Won't you just tell us what it
Sure.
is?
So there's a group of companies which catches consumers with 3 payments: activation fees, monthly service fees payable for 24 months, and then what they call a reliance benefit fee. So they promise these people that if they pay those reliance benefit fees for 10 years, at the end of that 10-year period, they will be refunded the activation fees for the first 2 weeks and the first 2 years, service fees. But when they try and claim that reliance benefit, and in the case of our case study, and listener Andy Lever, I asked him what he was expecting. He said about 40,000 rand. So now he's thinking, yay, I'm getting my 40,000 rand. Oh no, they then demand 10 years of bank statements. Now we think 3 months can be
Is onerous.
Yeah,
10 years.
10 years. And that's not even a requirement in terms of the contract. They just bring in this hurdle when you try and claim.
So, I mean, if they've told you up front, you would have made a note of downloading a statement
Every
every month
month,
for 10 years
yes.
and keeping it, because to go back and do that retrospectively becomes a very costly exercise.
Exactly.
The bank charges
Yes.
for the older ones.
So in Andy's case, he'd signed up with Vacation Hub International, and he did comply. He was like, I'm going to get this money. And then he was told, sorry, you missed a few payments, so you don't qualify. So it was another case. I said, Trudy, can you, do you handle these cases? And she had, well, let's hear from Trudy. He wasn't the only one.
He wasn't alone. Trudy, tell us more.
I wrote a letter on the 18th of July to this company, Vacation Hub International, to claim on behalf of 9 clients, of whom Andy Labour was one, that they be refunded this benefit that you get if you've been paying for the full 10 years. With Vacation Hub International, it's always a bit of it's just a tedious process, a real mission. But eventually, after I think about 10 emails from my side, I first got consent from them to pay the first a group of 5 of the 9, and they promised to pay them off in 3 installments. And then on the 19th of November, I eventually got a letter from the attorneys for Vacation Hub International saying that they would also pay, because I subsequently said, yes, but what about the other 4? And here are my legal arguments related to that, of whom Andy Labour is one. I got an offer that they would be paid in 4 equal installments from the 15th of December 2024. So we haven't seen the money yet, but we have an acknowledgement that they will be paid out. And in respect of the last 4, they've agreed to pay a portion of the legal fees, and they're even paying a little bit of interest, not the correct amount, but anyway, I think at this stage we're probably going to take what we can get and run.
Yeah. Okay, Trudy, listen, it's firstly, thank you for taking all the time this afternoon to explain to listeners what is possible and how to go about it. The other reason we're really grateful is I know that you've made some of this information on how to do this available on your website. Is that correct?
That's right. There are lots of little blog articles on my website about timeshare and about Vacation Hub International, but the chunky information, it's just a little bit easier to do it in a video on VHI, and the rest of the group of companies, Might Revolution, Go Autis, the Nexus Business Club is the latest company, and they all have a very similar modus operandi. All of that is on YouTube. My firm has a YouTube channel, and there are a few videos on VHI on there. So look for Trudy Brookman Attorneys and the VHI videos, and you'll get the lowdown there.
Trudy, thank you as always for being so generous with your time and with your pro bono assistance to those who are really in need. And to Cynthia, we wish you a full recovery and enjoyment of not seeing that debit order go off every month on hopes that at some point they will eventually realize that this horse has bolted and give up on harassing her for that money and write it off. in fairness, we did have that person earlier saying how difficult it was to get out of their holiday club contract. It was Alvin who wrote in saying he was the one who said we just stopped paying and told them to take us to court. That was Holiday Club. Daya has had a different experience with Holiday Club, saying I was a member. We had fantastic holidays from 1990 to 2007, having several great holidays for ourselves and family and friends. But after 17 years, I cancelled because the levies had become unaffordable. Very different experience here. Daya writes, I still owed an amount of 10,000 Rand, which was written off, and they allowed me
Wow,
to
that's
utilize
so
the
good to
balance of
hear.
my points for the final year. So I had a very good experience with Holiday Club.
That's what I said. It's not
Yeah.
always bad, and as we hear here, sometimes within the same company, there are
Yeah.
people who have good experiences and some who don't, which is quite mystifying. Why wouldn't they apply the same grace to people in similar circumstances?
Yeah.
Like, I can't afford the levies anymore. I need to get out.
Yeah,
Why wouldn't every one of them have the experience that
Daya had.
Daya had? Yeah.
Especially the pensioner going through cancer treatment. You would think
Exactly.
somebody at some level of the
That's a different
organisation
company,
would
though.
find
Yeah.
a level of human empathy, if nothing else. Thank you once again to Trudy Brookman, consumer attorney. And if you'd like to check out her website, it's Brookman with 2 N's, BROEKMANN, brookman.co.za. Otherwise, look for Trudy Brookman Attorneys on YouTube to find those videos that can help you with the process of how to extricate yourself from these situations if you are in that position.